They didn't even flinch when they toasted without me. That's how it started. A long white table on the rooftop of the Langston Hotel, with strings of gold lights stretched overhead and the Atlantic breeze moving just enough to remind us it was May. Graduation season. My mother had reserved the space weeks ago. "To celebrate both of you," she said. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime moment." That night, only one of us would be celebrated. I was seated at the far end of the table, between my cousin Bailey and the vacant seat my grandma hadn't yet filled. Chloe, my younger sister, sat near the center, next to Dad, where the lighting hit her just right. Her hair caught the gold of the lanterns. Her laughter came easy. The waiter brought out glasses of sparkling cider. My father stood and raised his. "To Chloe," he said, "to her future at Braxton, and the woman we always knew she would become." Applause, cheers. Even Grandma clapped when she finally joined us. I lifted my glass too, not because I agreed, but because it would have been more obvious if I didn't. They passed the shrimp cocktail. Someone asked about Chloe's housing deposit. My uncle leaned across the table to tell her he'd already written a letter of recommendation for a summer fellowship. No one asked me what I was doing after graduation. I'd be managing front desk rotations at a luxury hotel across town. My supervisor had offered me the role after I quietly revamped their outdated booking system. I built that system between double shifts and group projects, often falling asleep with my laptop on my chest. But no one raised a glass to me. The plates were cleared. Dessert menus arrived. Chloe asked for crème brûlée. I asked for nothing. And then it happened. My dad flagged down the server, gave him a firm nod, and casually said, "We'll take care of Chloe's tuition in full. She shouldn't have to stress about money right now." My mouth went dry. No one looked at me. Not right away. Then Mom chimed in with a soft smile. "She's earned it. She's put in the work. And with all the opportunities she'll have at Braxton..." I didn't hear the rest. My pulse was too loud. I waited for someone to speak. Anyone. But the conversation moved on like that was the only logical next step. I cleared my throat. What about mine? Chloe stopped twirling her spoon. Bailey looked away. My father's expression didn't change. "Avery," he said, like I was asking something unreasonable. "You've always been independent. You've handled things so well on your own." "You've had scholarships," Mom added, her voice soft, "and side jobs. You're good with money. We've always admired that about you." A pause. Then Chloe offered, "You're kind of built for it. You don't really need help the way I do." I stared at her, at all of them. I wanted to say 1,000 things, that working 3 jobs wasn't a personality trait, that my scholarship didn't cover books or housing, that I had skipped meals and begged professors for deadline extensions just to keep my GPA clean, that I had done everything alone, and now they were using that against me. But I didn't say any of it, because I knew, in that moment, nothing I said would change what they believed. They didn't see what I had done as effort. They saw it as evidence, proof that I didn't need them. The irony burned more than the salt air. I waited until the check came. I stood up, thanked the waiter, and walked out before anyone else had the chance to pretend they noticed I was hurting. Downstairs, the valet offered to call a cab. I shook my head and walked the 6 blocks to the lot where I'd parked. My car, an old Civic with a cracked dashboard, took 2 tries to start. I sat there for a while, windows down, hands still. Not angry. Not yet. Just awake. The kind of awake you feel when the illusion finally cracks, when you stop hoping someone might see you differently, when you finally understand that love, in some families, is conditional on convenience. They had shown me what they valued, and it wasn't me. I turned the key again. The car rumbled to life. Graduation was in 2 weeks. They would be there, sitting front row, smiling for photos, telling everyone how proud they were. And when I walked across that stage, something would be different, because I had spent 4 years building something they didn't even bother to ask about. And soon, the entire room would know what they chose to overlook. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was shocked, because deep down I wasn't, but because something final had settled in me, like a lock clicking shut. All those years of being the reliable one, the resourceful one, the one who didn't need much. They'd seen that as a reason to offer me less. And now, they'd turned my own strength into the justification for abandoning me. I stared at the ceiling of my studio apartment and tried to pinpoint when the narrative had shifted. Or maybe it never did. Maybe I was just finally ready to stop rewriting it in my head. The next morning, I skipped my usual routine. No coffee, no jog around the square. I just pulled on a hoodie, tucked my hair into a clip, and walked the 5 blocks to the hotel where I worked. The Langston Hotel, the same place where my parents toasted my sister while I poured their wine. I clocked in early, walked past the front desk with a nod to Margot, and headed down the service hallway to the event offices. My next shift wasn't until the weekend, but I needed something from my locker. On the inside of the metal door was a taped-up photo of me from freshman year. Sleeves rolled, name tag crooked, grinning next to a folding cart stacked with banquet linens. My manager had taken it and said, "You're going to run this place one day." I hadn't believed him then. Now I wasn't so sure he was wrong. I grabbed the folder I'd left in there last week, my capstone portfolio. Inside were business plans, staffing flowcharts, branding proposals. The final draft was due in 4 days. I'd planned to review it at home. But now, I needed to do something more with it. I didn't want to just graduate. I wanted to make noise. At Blue Ridge State, most seniors coasted their final month. I went harder. I rewrote my pitch deck. I emailed my professor twice for feedback. I took over the Sunday morning shift at the hotel to cover my last rent payment. No room for errors, no space for rest. On campus, Chloe's face was everywhere, a feature in the student newsletter, an Instagram reel from the Student Government Awards, a flyer announcing her as co-chair for the university's farewell gala. I smiled at each, not because I was bitter, but because I had my own version of her headline coming. I just hadn't told anyone yet. One afternoon, I passed a bulletin board near the business building. A flyer caught my eye. Senior Spotlight, submit your story for commencement recognition. It was nothing official. No prize money, no podium speech, just a segment in the graduation slideshow and a note in the alumni newsletter. But it was something. I snapped a photo of the QR code and walked straight to the library. For an hour, I stared at the blank submission box. What was I supposed to say? That my parents had paid for one daughter's dream while the other one lived off vending machine dinners and Excel sheets? Instead, I told the truth, the version I'd never said aloud. I wrote about my first week at college, about sleeping on a twin mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame yet, about walking to work in the rain because my car needed new brake pads, about tutoring international students in marketing strategy just to pay for groceries. But I also wrote about the moment things turned, the moment I realized I could build something that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. I hit submit before I could overthink it. A week later, I received an email from the commencement committee. "We'd like to feature your story, and there's more. Are you available to meet with Dean Reyes?" I read the line 3 times. Dean Reyes wasn't just the head of the business department. She was also the person who selected the student speaker for the college's pre-commencement dinner. The dinner my parents were already planning to attend. I confirmed the meeting instantly. Dean Reyes's office was on the top floor of the West Wing, lined with windows that overlooked the river. She offered me a seat, and I took it, calm on the outside, a wildfire underneath. "I read your submission," she said, "and I've seen your work over the past year. Professor Willard speaks very highly of your final portfolio." "Thank you," I said, trying not to sound too rehearsed. "We'd like you to represent the business school at the senior dinner. 5-minute speech. Nothing formal. But we want someone who reflects the grit and leadership we hope to foster here." I nodded slowly. "That's an honor," I said. "I'd be proud to." She smiled. "Good. I think it's time the room hears your voice." I didn't tell my parents. Not right away. They were busy making arrangements for Chloe's farewell brunch. Mom was circulating a digital invitation with her graduation photo, high heels, honor cords, captioned, "The beginning of everything." I kept quiet and worked on my speech at night, small notes on the subway, phrases jotted down while waiting for laundry. The theme kept shifting until I finally found it. What it costs to believe in yourself when no one else does. 2 nights before the dinner, Chloe called. "I saw your name on the guest list," she said. "For the senior dinner?" "I'll be there," I replied. "I'm speaking." A long pause. "Really?" she asked. Not rude, just surprised. "I guess they liked my story." "You never said anything." "I wanted it to speak for itself." She didn't say much after that, just wished me luck and hung up. But something in her voice had changed, like she was hearing me for the first time. On the night of the dinner, I wore navy, simple, clean, grounded. Chloe wore champagne satin. My parents sat at the center table, grinning like royalty. Until the dean stepped on stage and said, "Our next speaker is someone whose story captured not just our attention, but our respect. Please welcome Avery Morgan." They turned, confused. I stood, walked forward, and everything that had gone unsaid for years was about to find a microphone. The applause didn't feel real at first. I stood there behind the microphone, letting the sound wash over me while my heart thudded hard against my ribs. My parents clapped along with the rest of the crowd, but slower, more cautiously, as if they weren't sure what exactly they had just witnessed. They weren't used to seeing me in the spotlight, they weren't prepared to hear me speak, and they definitely weren't expecting to be left out of the narrative. My speech hadn't named them. It didn't need to. I talked about late-night shifts at the hotel, about finishing group projects while standing at a service desk, about teaching myself how to file taxes, negotiate contracts, and say no. I talked about the cost of being capable, how the world loves resilience until it gives it permission to abandon you. And I talked about rebuilding, quietly, with no fanfare, no safety net, just belief and a spreadsheet. I saw a professor tear up. The dean nodded through most of it. My classmates stared with the kind of recognition you don't fake, because they knew, some of them had lived it too. After the dinner, people came up to shake my hand. One student asked to use my quote in her yearbook caption. A staff member thanked me for saying what her daughter had been too afraid to say out loud. But my parents? They hovered in the background, watching, calculating, waiting to see how they were supposed to react. Chloe stood beside them, silent, eyes lowered. That night, I didn't go home right away. I walked instead, past the campus gates, through the historic district, across the bridge that overlooked the water. I let the cool air hit my face and the city lights blur behind it. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. The sadness had been replaced by something calmer, not acceptance, but clarity. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. The next morning, I opened my laptop and logged into the business plan submission portal for the state's Student Entrepreneurship Showcase. I uploaded my hospitality staffing concept, the same one that had earned me high marks in my capstone, and hit submit. It wasn't just a class project anymore. It was a blueprint. I spent the next month in motion. I worked, I pitched, I partnered. I met with 2 local inns who wanted help managing seasonal overflow. I interviewed students I trusted to work events. I built training packets and rotas. I stayed up until 2 a.m., formatting invoices and figuring out how to file as an LLC. By the time graduation week arrived, my tiny service had completed 5 successful hotel contracts. I never told my parents, not because I was hiding, but because I no longer needed them to know. Success, I realized, feels different when it's not about proving someone wrong. It feels better when it's just for you, when you don't care who notices, when the work speaks louder than the silence they left you in. The day before commencement, I received an email from the showcase director. My concept had placed in the top 5. There'd be a public presentation the following month. Local business leaders, press coverage, potential investors. I stared at the screen for a full minute, just breathing. This wasn't just a project anymore. It was traction. It was momentum. It was the start of something no one else had given me permission to want. At the graduation ceremony, I wore my cap tilted slightly forward, and the navy stole Dean Reyes had given me the night of the dinner. Chloe walked a few names ahead. Our parents sat near the front, still smiling, still performing. When my name was called, I heard the cheer before I saw who it came from. My manager at the Langston Hotel, standing in the back of the stadium with 2 of my coworkers. They held up a homemade sign with my company's name sketched in bold blue marker. I grinned so hard I couldn't stop. After the ceremony, Chloe found me near the rose garden behind the amphitheater. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a small card and looked away while I opened it. Inside was a short note in her handwriting. I never realized how much I didn't see. I do now. Congratulations, Avery. It was the first time she'd said something without a script. I nodded. Thanks. She tucked a piece of hair behind her ear and hesitated. Are you going to Mom and Dad's dinner tonight? I shook my head. I have something else planned. She didn't ask what, and I was grateful. That evening, I hosted my own dinner in the private room of a small riverside cafe. Just 12 people, my professors, my manager, 2 classmates who had stuck by me since day one. I didn't tell them this, but it felt like the first family dinner that actually belonged to me. We laughed until our sides hurt. We talked about next steps. Someone offered to introduce me to a local investor. Another suggested a part-time office I could use over the summer. As I stepped out onto the balcony later that night and looked out over the water, I thought about all the things I used to want: approval, recognition, belonging, and how none of them came from where I expected. But still, I had found them, piece by piece, on my own terms, because that's what a self-made story really is. Not flashy, not instant, but steady, built on every quiet choice to keep going, every night you study instead of sleep, every rejection you don't let sink you, every time you stand up when no one notices you were down. And I wasn't done yet. I wasn't expecting her at my door. Not that day. Not with tear tracks still drying on her face and a laptop clutched tight against her chest like it was all she had left. Chloe stood in the hallway of my apartment building, looking nothing like the girl who had glowed at the senior gala. Her usual confidence had cracked. The silence between us was short, but heavy. "I'm failing my final," she said. "I don't know how to fix it." She didn't say hi. She didn't ask if I had time. She just stood there, scared, and for the first time in our lives, she wasn't the golden child with a plan. She was a student who hadn't prepared, in a moment of panic, reaching out to the sister she'd always overlooked. I stepped back and held the door open. "Come in." She walked in quietly, sitting on the edge of the couch like she didn't know if she was allowed to get comfortable. I made tea, not because she asked, but because it gave me a moment to breathe. My desk was a mess, notes from client meetings, my hotel work schedule, a grant application I was halfway through. All things I could have used as an excuse. But I didn't. She opened her laptop, turned the screen to me, and began explaining her thesis project. Political theory, power structures, influence of narrative on public perception. Her paper was supposed to analyze modern campaign strategy, but it was scattered, paragraphs with no anchor, references without a clear voice. She was trying to sound smart instead of saying something real. I spent the next 2 hours breaking it down with her, asking questions, challenging her assumptions, showing her how to build an argument that held weight. She took notes in silence, occasionally nodding, her usual defenses gone. There was no eye roll, no quick retort, just quiet focus. Somewhere between reworking her 3rd chapter and rebuilding her introduction, we paused for a break. She looked over at me, her voice lower than usual. "Did you do all of this alone?" she asked. I didn't have to ask what she meant. "Yeah," I said. She looked down at her tea, then back up. "I didn't know. I just figured you were fine." Most people did. She sat with that, and I let her. For once, I didn't rush to make her feel better. I didn't explain away the loneliness or the exhaustion. I let the truth fill the space between us. "You're really good at this," she said. "Better than anyone on my team. Why didn't you go into policy?" "Because I wanted to build things, not just talk about how broken they are." She smiled, a small, tired smile, but genuine. When we finished editing, she closed her laptop and stayed seated. I could tell she wasn't ready to leave yet. Her guard was down in a way I'd never seen before, and when she finally stood, she paused at the door. "Thank you," she said, "not just for today, for not holding it against me." I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who was starting to understand how much of our lives had been shaped by a story neither of us wrote. "You're welcome," I said. "Just try to see me now, not just when you need something." She nodded, and this time it felt like she meant it. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet, not angry, not drained, just aware of how far I'd come, of how far we still had to go, and of how hard it is to choose grace in the place where revenge would be easier. But that was the difference now. I didn't need payback. I had peace. It happened on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic. No announcement. No confrontation. Just a quiet shift I felt deep in my chest the moment I realized I had moved past them, and they hadn't even noticed. That morning, I woke early, as usual. My calendar was stacked. A site visit at the Harborway Inn, a call with a new partner property upstate, and a pitch meeting for a grant that could double our outreach. The company was still small, still scrappy, but it was real and profitable. We'd just signed our 9th seasonal hotel. I had a part-time operations assistant and 3 freelancers who rotated between front desk and housekeeping coverage. It wasn't flashy, but it was sustainable. I was paying rent, putting aside savings, and building something I could scale, all of it without help, without approval, and most importantly, without permission. At 9 a.m., I walked into a local conference center for a hospitality roundtable. I'd been invited as a guest speaker, one of the few under 30 in a room full of seasoned directors and general managers. I wore a pressed navy blazer and carried a portfolio with printed copies of my staffing efficiency models. When I introduced myself, I no longer stumbled over the word founder. It felt right now. It fit. My segment was slotted just after the regional Marriott rep. When I took the mic, I spoke clearly and simply about micro-hospitality, student training pipelines, and reducing turnover through flexible scheduling. When I finished, the moderator thanked me and called it innovative. A manager from a historic inn in Savannah asked if I was open to expanding beyond Charleston. I smiled and said, "Soon." By noon, I'd handed out 12 business cards. By 1, I was back at my shared office space, reviewing onboarding documents for a summer crew. Somewhere between signature pages and tax forms, it hit me. This used to be the dream. Not the applause, not the invitations, just the stability, the certainty, the ability to choose what I said yes or no to without flinching at the price tag. I was, for the first time in my life, ahead. Not in the loud ways people notice, not with a viral video or a car with a bow on it, just in the way that mattered. I no longer needed to chase what they refused to give. That night, I stopped by the Langston to drop off final paychecks for my student crew. The concierge waved as I walked through the lobby. I passed the grand staircase, the place where Chloe once took her senior photo. My heels echoed softly on the marble as I headed to the break room, where my team was packing up supplies from a wedding the night before. "We finished early," one of them said, grinning. "Client left a tip. Want us to split it?" I shook my head. "Keep it. You earned it." Their smiles were all the thanks I needed. When I left, I stood for a moment outside the hotel. It looked the same. Gleaming windows, valet hustle, soft jazz playing through the front doors. But it didn't feel the same. It didn't hold power over me anymore. This place, once the center of my world, was now just one of many buildings on a list of partnerships, one of many options, one of many wins. Across the street was a new cafe that had just opened. I stepped inside, ordered a tea, and sat near the window. From that seat, I could see everything. The hotel, the old trolley line, the students walking back from late classes. I opened my laptop and responded to an inquiry from a boutique lodge 2 states away. They were interested in my model. I sent over the pricing sheet and terms, then I looked down at my phone. A message from Chloe. "I passed. B+ on the final. Couldn't have done it without you." No emojis, no extra fluff, just acknowledgement. I responded simply, "Glad you did the work. You deserve that grade." She heart-reacted the message, and that was it. I leaned back in the chair and let my breath settle. There was no big moment, no scene, no grand apology. But I didn't need one. I'd found something better than their recognition. I had my own. The next morning, I got a call from Dean Reyes. "The university board is nominating you for the Young Alumni Entrepreneur Circle," she said. "They're putting together a video feature. You'll be highlighted alongside a tech founder from DC and a nonprofit leader from Atlanta." I thanked her, then hung up and stared at my wall for a long minute. That video would go out to the entire alumni network. My parents were on that list. Later that week, I received an invitation to Chloe's birthday dinner. I almost didn't go, but I did, mostly for Grandma. It was at the house, catered, clean, too perfect. Chloe was polite. Mom greeted me with a hug that felt like habit. Dad asked if I was still doing that hotel thing. I smiled. "Yes, we're expanding into Georgia this quarter." He blinked. "That's impressive." "It's been steady," I said. "My team's great." Chloe joined us. "She just got nominated for something, an alumni thing, right?" I nodded once. "Just a little recognition." Dad raised his eyebrows. "Good for you." It was almost enough to sound sincere. After dinner, as guests drifted out and laughter settled into background noise, I caught my own reflection in the window. Same face, same frame. But nothing about me was the same. I didn't need a better seat at the table. I'd built my own. And sitting in that room, surrounded by people who used to make me feel small, I realized they hadn't changed. But I had. And that was the revenge. Not rage. Not revenge porn or slamming doors. Just quiet progress. Quiet, unstoppable progress. It started with a mistake. Small. Almost forgettable. My mother called and meant to leave a message for Chloe. Instead, she left it on my voicemail. "Tell her to wear something neutral. No need to outshine the guest speaker." Her voice was light, clipped, and then she added, "Emma's going to be there, right? Let's keep it simple." I listened to it twice. Neutral. No need to outshine. They were still trying to manage the lighting even when I had become the stage. The invitation had come from the university. The alumni spotlight event would highlight 3 honorees, 1 tech founder, 1 community leader, and me, the youngest hospitality entrepreneur ever nominated by our department. It was formal, with press in attendance and a short video introduction for each guest. I hadn't invited my parents. I didn't need to. The university had done that automatically, part of the donor circle, part of the show. I arrived alone. My assistant, Lily, was already there, setting up materials. The staff had set a reserved sign for my section, right near the front. People nodded at me as I entered, some familiar, others new. My video played second, after the founder who'd built a wellness app with 500,000 users. Mine was simpler. Footage of the Langston, overlay clips of me walking through a smaller property in North Carolina, then the final shot, me speaking to a group of student interns in the back hallway of one of our seasonal hotels. The applause was honest, not thunderous, not forced, just warm. After the panel, I stood near the entrance to thank guests when I saw them. My father first, stiff in a suit I'd seen him wear to fundraisers. Then my mother, eyes already scanning the room like she was afraid she might miss something. Chloe trailed behind them, and when she looked at me, her smile faltered. They approached, slowly, hesitant in a way they never were when I was just the daughter sitting at the edge of someone else's spotlight. "Your segment was very well done," my father said. My mother added, "The music choice was lovely." Chloe said nothing, just nodded. I thanked them, then turned to greet a professor. A colleague from the Economic Development Office came over to shake my hand. A donor asked if I'd be open to mentorship. I engaged naturally, while watching from the corner of my eye as my family slowly drifted away. Not because I ignored them, but because I no longer needed their attention, and they could feel that. Later that evening, after the event had wrapped, I took a car home. No after-party, no reception. Just quiet. I sat on my couch and looked through the photos Lily had taken, my posture, my confidence, the way I looked into the crowd, not searching, just grounded. I didn't realize until then how visible I had become, and how uncomfortable that made them. A week passed, then 2. No calls, no texts, just the usual messages from work, a few new partnership inquiries, and one email from a university admin asking if I would consider speaking at the Winter Entrepreneurship Series. I said yes. The truth was simple. I had arrived, and they couldn't say anything without acknowledging what they never gave. So they stayed quiet, and so did I. One Saturday morning, I walked into the Landing, our newest property. It used to be an abandoned rail station motel, now fully renovated with 12 rooms, local artist features, and a rooftop space that had just booked its third wedding. As I walked past the check-in kiosk, a couple waved from the lounge. "Emma, right? We saw your article in the Charleston Business Review. You built this?" I nodded, shook hands, and thanked them. They asked for a tour. I gave them one. By the end, the woman smiled and said, "I hope your parents are proud. This place is special." I smiled gently. "Thank you," I said. She had no idea what that sentence meant to me or how much weight it still carried. But I let it go. I didn't explain. I didn't rewind the story to include who didn't believe in me. I didn't mention the missing loans or the skipped tuition. I didn't need to, because I had created something that spoke louder than all of it. That night, I sat on the rooftop patio alone. The string lights flickered above, and a soft breeze moved through the herbs in the planter boxes. I thought about legacy, not just the kind you inherit, but the kind you build when no one else is watching. Success, I'd learned, is not about applause. It's about silence, the kind that comes when you no longer need validation to feel complete. They hadn't said much since the event. Maybe they were waiting for me to bridge the space, or maybe they didn't know how. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was simply done offering explanations for a story they chose not to read. I had written my own, and the most powerful line in it was the one I never spoke aloud. I made it, even when you didn't think I would. There's a strange sort of freedom that comes when you stop needing someone to say, "I'm sorry." It doesn't arrive like a revelation. It's quiet, like the way a heavy rain finally stops, and you only notice because the silence feels lighter. That freedom found me on a Thursday evening, in the middle of organizing files for a grant report. I had just finished reviewing our summer projections when I came across an old email, buried deep in a folder I hadn't touched in months. It was from the first week I launched my business. Subject line, "Maybe slow down?" It had been sent by my father. I clicked it open, already knowing what it said. "Emma, I know you're eager to prove yourself, but hospitality is a hard industry. Don't burn yourself out. Maybe look for something more stable." There was no malice in it, just dismissal, wrapped in concern. He didn't believe I could do it. Not really. And back then, I thought I needed him to. But that night, I stared at the email and felt nothing. Not pain, not resentment, just distance. It was like reading a letter addressed to someone I used to be. That's when I knew. I had moved on. I didn't need a conversation. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation. I didn't even need acknowledgement. I had outgrown the version of myself that craved their approval. And I wasn't angry about it anymore. I was grateful. Because the hunger they created, the absence, the dismissal, the favoritism, had forced me to build a resilience I didn't know I was capable of. They didn't realize it, but every no they gave me had quietly become a reason to say yes to myself. A few days later, I was invited to a small business feature segment on a local podcast. The host asked about my beginnings, how I'd gone from cleaning rooms to managing properties. I told her the truth, that I started out solo, that I didn't have investors, that I used my graduation money and saved every dime I earned working night shifts. She asked about support. I paused for half a second. "I didn't have much," I said, "but I had clarity. I knew what I wanted to build, and sometimes that's enough." The episode aired the following week. It got more traction than I expected, shared by the university page, reposted by 2 of our partner hotels, and sent to me by friends I hadn't spoken to in years. One message came from a high school teacher. "I always knew you'd do something meaningful." Another came from Chloe. She didn't say much, just a link to the episode and a text. I listened to this twice. I had no idea. "I'm sorry I wasn't there." It took me a long time to respond, and when I did, I simply wrote, "Thank you. I'm okay now." Because I was. A few weeks later, I ran into my mother at the Saturday market. She was buying flowers. I was picking up locally made soaps for guest welcome kits. We made eye contact. She approached first. "Your grandmother mentioned the podcast. She was proud." I nodded. "That means a lot." She hesitated. "I didn't realize how much you'd done on your own." I didn't say anything, just let the moment breathe. She added, "I know we weren't as supportive as we should have been." Still, I said nothing. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I no longer needed anything from her. My healing didn't depend on their recognition. I had found it elsewhere, in the properties I built, the lives I touched, the stability I carved out of chaos. She tried again. "Maybe you could come for dinner. Your father would like that." I smiled gently, the way you do with someone you no longer expect anything from. "Maybe sometime," I said. We left it at that. Later that evening, I sat with Lily and my student intern crew, finalizing prep for an upcoming wedding. As we packed linen and checked inventory, laughter filled the space. They asked about my first year, how I'd handled it all alone. "I didn't know what I was doing half the time," I admitted, "but I figured it out. That's what you do when no one's coming to save you." One of them said, "That's badass." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt true. And it felt earned. That night, I opened a blank document and started drafting something I'd been meaning to write. A letter to myself, 5 years ago. Not for publication, not for performance, just for me. I wrote about how hard it was, how lonely, how the silence from the people I loved used to hurt more than any rejection letter, how I used to cry while folding laundry because it was the only time I was still enough to feel everything. And then I wrote about now, the peace, the steadiness, the fact that I no longer flinched when I succeeded. I didn't need their apology, because I had learned to stop apologizing to myself. I didn't plan to write the letter. It just started. One quiet evening in January, I sat at the oak desk in my apartment, the windows fogged from the cold, a cup of Earl Grey going lukewarm beside me. The city outside was soft with winter silence, and I had just finished the final numbers for the quarter. Growth was steady. Bookings for spring were already up. By every metric, I was thriving. But inside me, something unfinished stirred. It had been nearly a year since the graduation dinner, since my father's toast that didn't include me, since I realized that the love I longed for might never come the way I hoped it would, since I stopped needing them to catch up with who I'd become. But that didn't mean I didn't remember. And that night, without drama or bitterness, I opened a fresh document typed "Dear Mom and Dad," and let my fingers speak what my mouth never would. It wasn't angry, it wasn't accusatory, it was just honest. I wrote about the first time I felt left out, when Chloe got piano lessons and I got hand-me-downs. I wrote about the time I asked for help with college essays and was told to figure it out because Chloe had a scholarship to maintain. I wrote about all the silent moments, the birthdays where they were traveling, the missed voicemails, the polite but distant holiday texts. And then I wrote about now, about what I had built, the lives I'd touched, the people who called me a mentor, the properties that stood because I believed in them long before anyone else did. I told them that I wasn't writing for forgiveness or to make them feel guilty. I was writing because I had carried too much in silence, and I didn't want to anymore. Then came the most important part. I told them I was okay, that I had found peace, not in reconciliation, but in release, that I no longer measured my worth by their recognition, and that the space between us no longer hurt. It just was. When I finished, I didn't cry. I didn't even reread it. I saved the file, closed my laptop, and sat in stillness for a long time. That letter was never meant to be sent. It was meant to be heard by the version of me who used to wait for someone to understand. Writing it was the apology I had been waiting for, from myself. A week later, I was walking the property lines at the Mariner, our new boutique renovation in Beaufort, when I got a call from Chloe. She rarely called, usually just texts, short, clipped updates about our parents or some distant cousin's wedding, but this time it was her voice. "Hey, Weird question. Are you coming to Mom's birthday dinner? I hesitated. Was I invited? Of course you were. I mean, I thought you were. I smiled faintly. It's okay, I'm not upset. She paused. It's just a small thing. I think she wants you there. I didn't answer right away. She added, You don't have to come. I just figured, I don't know. Things feel weird, like there's space between us, but no one knows how to cross it. For once, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it sit. Then I said, Maybe it's not about crossing it. Maybe it's about learning how to live with it. She didn't argue, just sighed softly. Yeah, maybe. After we hung up, I sat down in the open-air courtyard of the Mariner. The winter breeze drifted in from the water. I pulled out my phone, opened the Notes app, and read through a few lines from the letter again. Not to relive the pain, but to remind myself that I'd already spoken the truth, if only to me, and it was enough. Sometimes healing doesn't come with a conversation. It comes with clarity, with finally seeing yourself clearly, apart from who you were told to be. That night, I printed the letter, folded it once, slid it into a blank envelope and tucked it inside the back of my bookshelf. Not hidden, not forgotten, just resting. A piece of my past, written in a voice that had finally stopped whispering. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. It was ivory, thick, the kind of paper you don't use unless you want someone to feel like it matters. On the back, embossed in gold, were my parents' initials intertwined in a delicate floral design, and inside was a formal invitation. You are cordially invited to celebrate Linda and James Whitmore's 35th wedding anniversary. Dinner to be held at the Garden House, February 3rd, 7 p.m. Formal attire. I stared at it the way you might stare at a locked door you're not sure you want to open again. At first, I laughed, quietly, to myself. The same parents who didn't attend my graduation, who didn't fund my education or even send a card, now sending me a personalized invitation for their anniversary. I half expected a handwritten note, some explanation, some olive branch. But there was none. Just the formality, just the performance. Still, I didn't throw it away. I told myself it was because I was busy, finishing the restoration work on the Mariner, hosting a new couple's micro-wedding at our Charleston property. But the truth was quieter, harder to admit. A part of me still wondered what it would be like to walk into that room as the version of myself they never got to know. Would they see me now? Would it matter? I mentioned it to Lily while we were doing a final walkthrough before a health inspector visit. Are you thinking of going? She asked, adjusting a decorative sconce on the hallway wall. I don't know, I said. Feels like stepping back into a play I've already walked off stage from. Lily nodded slowly. But sometimes the final act is worth watching, even if you're just sitting in the audience. I smiled. That was the thing about her. Always knew how to say things that sounded like poetry and advice rolled into one. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and tried on the navy blue dress I had worn to my last investor pitch. It fit well. Clean lines, confident silhouette. I looked different. Older, maybe. Sharper, but not hard. I imagined walking into the garden house, seeing Chloe across the table, my father in a tailored suit, raising a glass, my mother playing hostess, smiling too wide for too long. I imagined the conversations. So what do you do again, Emma? You look great, so stylish now. We always knew you'd find your way. And I imagined myself nodding, smiling politely, sipping something expensive I didn't finish. Because I already knew, nothing they could say would rewrite the missing years. Nothing they wore could soften the silence I lived through. And no amount of celebration would stitch me back into a family that only remembered me when it was convenient. I took off the dress and folded it neatly back into the garment bag. The next morning, I called Chloe. Tell Mom and Dad thank you for the invitation, I said, but I won't be coming. There was a long pause on the other end. Okay, she said finally. Can I ask why? Because I don't want to pretend. She didn't push. I understand. And I believed she did. Maybe not completely, but enough. On the night of the dinner, I didn't sit at home. I took myself to dinner instead. Table for one, corner seat, overlooking the waterfront. I ordered a glass of Sauvignon Blanc and the chef's special, and I brought a book with me. Not because I needed company, but because I'd always loved the quiet power of a woman dining alone with confidence. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. A picture message from Chloe. She stood in the garden, dressed in emerald green, holding a champagne flute. Our parents were behind her, smiling. Below it, "It was a nice evening, but not the same without you." I typed a response, deleted it, then typed again. "Thanks for thinking of me." That was all I could give. Because healing isn't always about going back. Sometimes it's choosing not to. Chloe called 2 days later. Not a text, not a voice memo, a full call, something she didn't often do anymore.
I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice even. "I heard they stopped by," she said. "No greeting, no small talk, just that." "They did." "Are you okay?" I paused before answering. "Yes." Another pause on her end, but this one wasn't empty. It was heavy, thoughtful. "I didn't tell them to go," she added quickly. "They asked for the address after the anniversary dinner. I didn't think they'd actually show up. They were curious. That's human." She exhaled. "Still, I should have told you." "I'm not mad, Chloe." But that wasn't the full truth, and we both knew it. I stepped out onto my balcony. The Atlantic shimmered in the distance, pale and restless. A breeze tugged at the edges of my cardigan. I let it. "They said anything?" she asked. "They looked around, commented on the decor, admired the layout, asked questions like they were touring a historical site with no personal connection to the architect." Chloe laughed softly, but it was the kind that ends with a sigh. "Classic." "They were polite," I said. "Polished, professional, detached." "And you?" "I was present." That silence again. She always had a way of leaving space for me to say more without asking directly. I sat down in one of the Adirondack chairs. "They asked me to dinner." "What did you say?" "I said I had to work." "That's not a no." "No," I agreed, "but it wasn't a yes either." She was quiet. Then, "Emma, they don't know how to come back." "Not really. I think sometimes they expect you to do it for them." "I've spent years doing that," I said, "filling in their blanks, soothing their guilt, pretending that the things they didn't do didn't leave marks." "I know," she said. "I saw it. I didn't always know how to say it out loud, but I saw it." "That surprised me. I thought you were their favorite." "I was," she said without hesitation, "but it came with strings, expectations, quiet obedience. I didn't get left out, Emma. I got absorbed." I didn't answer right away. "I envied you sometimes," she added. That made me laugh. Sharp, incredulous. "You shouldn't," I said. "You really shouldn't." "I know, but you had space to become someone outside of them. I didn't realize how trapped I was until I watched you build something on your own. I built it because I didn't have a choice." "Still," she said, "you built it." For a long time, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Then she said, "They've started talking about selling the lake house." "Of course," I said. "Asset over memory." "They'll ask us to split the proceeds, even though you never got to spend summers there like I did." I don't need the money. I know, but it's about more than that. I know. Another pause. The waves continued their rhythm in the background, like a second heartbeat beneath our conversation. You know what I wish? She said. What? That they had seen this version of you when you still needed them. I don't know if I ever needed them to see it. I just needed them to want to. That's fair. The wind picked up. Somewhere below, someone was laughing. Maybe one of the guests on the back patio. Life was still happening. Quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. I'm proud of you, Chloe said suddenly. The words hung in the air, soft and clear. Thanks, I said, and I meant it. She added, for not letting their absence define your success. I thought about that. Sometimes I think it did define it, I admitted, but not in the way they feared, not in rebellion, just in quiet insistence that I existed, fully, completely, even if they never fully showed up. That's the strongest kind of success. We stayed on the phone a while longer, talking about small things, spring plans, a guest house idea, a recipe she wanted to try. But something had shifted. We weren't the same sisters we used to be. Not competing, not surviving, just seeing each other clearly. And that, I realized, was more than I ever thought I'd get. Chloe called 2 days later, not a text, not a voice memo, a full call, something she didn't often do anymore. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, I said, keeping my voice even. I heard they stopped by, she said. No greeting, no small talk, just that. They did. Are you okay? I paused before answering. Yes? Another pause on her end, but this one wasn't empty. It was heavy, thoughtful. I didn't tell them to go, she added quickly. They asked for the address after the anniversary dinner. I didn't think they'd actually show up. They were curious. That's human. She exhaled. Still, I should have told you. I'm not mad, Chloe, but that wasn't the full truth, and we both knew it. I stepped out onto my balcony. The Atlantic shimmered in the distance, pale and restless. A breeze tugged at the edges of my cardigan. I let it. They said anything? She asked. They looked around, commented on the decor, admired the layout, asked questions like they were touring a historical site with no personal connection to the architect. Chloe laughed softly, but it was the kind that ends with a sigh. Classic. They were polite, I said, polished, professional, detached. And you? I was present. That silence again. She always had a way of leaving space for me to say more without asking directly. I sat down in one of the Adirondack chairs. They asked me to dinner. What did you say? I said I had to work. That's not a no. No, I agreed, but it wasn't a yes either. She was quiet. Then, Emma, they don't know how to come back. Not really. I think sometimes they expect you to do it for them. I've spent years doing that, I said, filling in their blanks, soothing their guilt, pretending that the things they didn't do didn't leave marks. I know, she said. I saw it. I didn't always know how to say it out loud, but I saw it. That surprised me. I thought you were their favorite. I was, she said without hesitation, but it came with strings, expectations, quiet obedience. I didn't get left out, Emma. I got absorbed. I didn't answer right away. I envied you sometimes, she added. That made me laugh, sharp, incredulous. You shouldn't, I said. You really shouldn't. I know, but you had space to become someone outside of them. I didn't realize how trapped I was until I watched you build something on your own. I built it because I didn't have a choice. Still, she said, you built it. For a long time, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Then she said, they've started talking about selling the lake house. Of course, I said. Asset over memory. They'll ask us to split the proceeds, even though you never got to spend summers there like I did. I don't need the money. I know, but it's about more than that. I know. Another pause. The waves continued their rhythm in the background, like a second heartbeat beneath our conversation. You know what I wish, she said. What? That they had seen this version of you when you still needed them. I don't know if I ever needed them to see it. I just needed them to want to. That's fair. The wind picked up. Somewhere below, someone was laughing. Maybe one of the guests on the back patio. Life was still happening. Quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. I'm proud of you, Chloe said suddenly. The words hung in the air, soft and clear. Thanks, I said, and I meant it. She added, for not letting their absence define your success. I thought about that. Sometimes I think it did define it, I admitted, but not in the way they feared, not in rebellion, just in quiet insistence that I existed, fully, completely, even if they never fully showed up. That's the strongest kind of success.
We stayed on the phone a while longer, talking about small things, spring plans, a guest house idea, a recipe she wanted to try.
But something had shifted. We weren't the same sisters we used to be, not competing, not surviving, just seeing each other clearly. And that, I realized, was more than I ever thought I'd get.
The email came in on a quiet Sunday morning. The subject line was short, "Hope you're well." The sender, Linda Whitmore. Just seeing my mother's name in my inbox made my fingers still over the keyboard. I stared at it for minutes before I could even think of clicking. I didn't open it then. I made coffee, fed the cat, took a walk around the property, checked on a squeaky gate hinge near the guest patio. I scrubbed the baseboards in room 4 just to keep from feeling too much. It sat there, glowing quietly, unread and patient like so many things my mother left unsaid. When I finally opened it, I felt no anticipation. I already knew the tone. I already knew the format. Dear Emma, I hope this note finds you well. I wanted to thank you again for letting us visit the Mariner. Your father and I were both deeply impressed, not just by the inn, but by you. You've built something very special. We'd love to stay in touch more often if you're open to that. And perhaps, if you ever have time, we could try again for that dinner. No pressure. Just love. Warmly, Mom. I read it once, then again, and instead of warmth, all I felt was an old ache, like touching a bruise I forgot I had. It wasn't a bad email, not on the surface. It was polite, even generous in tone. But that was always my mother's specialty, grace that skimmed just above the surface of things, never deep enough to touch what mattered. I closed my laptop and sat back. The email remained marked unread. It didn't deserve my urgency, and I wasn't the same daughter who used to chase apologies wrapped in soft words. Years ago, a note like that would have meant everything. When I was 19 and trying to decide between schools, when I was hoping they'd help me move out, or even just ask about my dorm. When I graduated with a degree they never visited to see me earn. When I got my first promotion and thought for a wild moment that I might call home just to hear someone say, "Well done." Then, I would have replied in seconds. But now? Now, I was the woman who had survived without their warmth. I had grown my own roots. I had lit my own path. And I was finally, not living on borrowed validation. That afternoon, I called Lily in to help me decide whether to answer. She read the message, leaning slightly over my desk. "She's trying," she said finally. I nodded. "She is. But trying doesn't undo the quiet." Lily tilted her head. "What do you want from her, Emma?" That question stuck with me. What did I want? A time machine? A childhood where my wins weren't measured against Chloe's? A version of my mother that stayed present for the hard years instead of folding into silence? Maybe once I wanted all that. But now? Now I just wanted peace. Peace isn't revenge. It's just knowing you no longer owe anyone an explanation for how you survived. Lily closed my laptop gently. "Then you don't need to answer," she said. "You're allowed to let that be enough." I didn't reply that night. Instead, I went down to the guest porch and lit the lanterns early. A couple from Chicago had left a handwritten note in the guest book thanking us for the most soul-soothing stay of their lives. I watered the hydrangeas and watched the tide come in. I didn't feel bitter. I didn't feel cruel. Just quiet and grounded, like someone who had finally stopped looking over her shoulder to see if her parents had noticed her becoming someone. A few days later, Chloe messaged, "They said they emailed. Should I say anything?" I typed slowly, "Tell them I got it." And I'm thinking, because I was. But not in the way they probably hoped. I wasn't thinking about reconnecting. I was thinking about how far I'd come and whether I owed anything to the people who left halfway through the movie but showed up for the closing credits. I still hadn't replied by the end of that week, and I wasn't sure I ever would. Some silences are heavy, but some are healing. Mine was the second kind. Her name was Judith McKenna, and she booked room 3 for 6 nights under the name J. McKenna. No frills, no notes, just a quiet reservation made through our site at 2:08 a.m. I only remembered the timestamp because something about the stillness of that hour always stayed with me. People don't book last-minute seaside stays at 2:08 in the morning unless they're chasing something, or running from something, or both. Judith arrived on a Thursday afternoon with just a navy carry-on and a leather satchel. No family, no partner, just her and a pair of shoes that looked like they'd walked through 100 kinds of grief. She smiled politely when I welcomed her. Not warm, not cold, just resigned. Her check-in was uneventful, but I noticed things. She lingered in the library longer than most. She skipped the continental breakfast but left a note asking if she could just take her coffee out by the bluff in the mornings. She walked with the kind of stillness that screamed of things unsaid. I didn't intrude. That's something I've learned here. People don't always need talking. Sometimes they just need space to fall apart gently. It wasn't until her 4th night that we spoke more than a few words. I was closing up the dining porch when I saw her standing near the shoreline, her figure almost silhouetted against the moonlight. She looked so small. The ocean looked so endless. I walked down the gravel path and paused a few feet away. "Not too cold out here?" I asked softly. She turned slightly. "I'm from Maine. This is practically tropical." We both laughed. She gestured to the bench near the dune fence. "Sit?" I did. For a while, we just listened to the waves folding into themselves. Then she said, "I used to come here with my daughter. Not this exact place, but this coast. She loved the salt air, said it made her feel clean from the inside out." I looked at her gently. "Did something happen to her?" She nodded. "Cancer. Quick, relentless. She was 25. I didn't say anything. Just let that silence do what it needed to. "She always told me to go somewhere alone after," Judith said. "Said I'd need it. She left me a list. Top 10 places by the ocean. This was number 7. That made me smile, sad and warm all at once. 7's a lucky number, she shrugged. Or maybe just far enough down the list that I wouldn't pick it first. She knew I'd delay. She sounds like she knew you well. She did, Judith whispered. Better than I knew myself. Another wave crashed, higher this time. We sat with it. Judith's voice came again, quieter. I thought closure was something you walked toward, that if I did all the things she asked, I'd feel better, like finishing a checklist for grief. But it turns out, closure isn't about endings. It's about standing still long enough to feel everything you've tried to outrun. I felt my throat tighten. That's true. She turned to me. What about you? This place, why did you build it? I hesitated. Then I said, because I needed something that belonged to me. Because I didn't want the way they left me to be the final story. I wanted a story where I stayed. Judith nodded. Then this place is your closure. No, I said slowly. It's my beginning. My closure was when I stopped needing them to explain why they didn't show up. She looked at me, really looked. And did they? They tried, years later, through a neat little email. She exhaled like she understood every word I hadn't said. Did you respond? No. Judith smiled. Not the sad one this time, a real one. I think that's the bravest thing I've heard all week, she said. We sat there until the moon dipped lower, until our hands grew cold and the wind made our eyes tear. We didn't need to say anything more. The next morning she checked out early, leaving a note tucked into the room's desk. Thank you for holding space for me, and thank you for reminding me that sometimes the best conversations happen in silence. You gave me more than a view of the ocean. You gave me the courage to keep going. Judith. I stood there for a long time after she left, holding the note, because something in that night had shifted something in me. I realized closure didn't need to come with a reply. It didn't need to come in words at all. Sometimes it walked beside you quietly in the dark, listening to waves and holding your hand without touching it. People often speak of closure and forgiveness in the same breath, like they're chapters in the same book, bound by a mutual ending. But I learned they're not twins. They're not even cousins. Closure is about facing the wound. Forgiveness is about choosing what you do with the scar. After Judith left, I noticed I started breathing differently, slower, calmer. There was a steadiness to my mornings again. I wasn't waiting for anything, not for an apology, not for a knock on the door. I made breakfast for our guests like always. I watered the rosemary and checked our monthly bookings. But something inside me had settled, not because someone made things right, but because I'd stopped letting it be the thing that defined me. That same week, my mother sent a second email. The subject line this time was shorter, just my name. Not Emma, but M. The way she used to call me before things got strained. Before Chloe's achievements turned into comparisons, and I became the daughter who never needed as much. I didn't open it right away. I waited until the inn was quiet. Midnight, maybe later. I sat in my office, tea gone cold beside me, and finally clicked. I know the first note wasn't enough. I know we missed years that mattered. And I know you probably think there's nothing we could say now that would matter. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not just in the easy way people are when they've been caught in their absence. I mean it in the way that aches, the kind that keeps you up because you realize you spent your energy on the wrong fires. I should have been there, not just for your graduation, but for the nights before, for the job interviews, for the heartbreaks I didn't know about. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a reply. I just need you to know that loving you never stopped, even when showing it did. Mom, I read it twice. I didn't cry, but I felt something loosen in my chest. It was the kind of email she never would have sent 5 years ago, or even last year. It was still late, but it was real. That mattered. I thought about replying, not out of obligation, but because I realized something. I'd found my closure, but I hadn't yet decided if forgiveness was a part of it. For days, I walked with that question, carried it in my shoulders, let it follow me around the garden, the linen closet, the kitchen where Lily and I folded menus for the upcoming retreat guests. When I finally spoke it out loud, we were in the wine cellar restocking for the weekend. "Do you think you can forgive someone without ever speaking to them again?" I asked. Lily paused, bottle in hand. "I think forgiveness is more for the person holding the weight than the one who caused it." "I'm not angry anymore," I said, "but I don't know if that means I've forgiven them, or if I just let it go because holding it was exhausting." "Maybe that's the same thing," she replied. Maybe it was. That night I didn't reply to the email, but I did write something in my journal. 4 pages. Every memory I had of my mother that still stung. Every moment that chipped away at my trust. And then, I closed the book and slid it into the drawer beside my bed. I didn't rip it up. I didn't burn it. I just put it away. Because sometimes, not needing revenge is the quietest version of forgiveness. Not needing the last word, not needing them to feel what you felt, just letting your life be the proof that you healed anyway. 2 days later, Chloe messaged me again. "Mom said she emailed. She's not expecting anything, just wanted you to know she's thinking of you. She's been softer lately, different. Maybe it's age, maybe it's you." I replied, "I know. I read it. I'm okay. Tell her that." It wasn't a full reply, it wasn't a reunion, but it was a beginning. And maybe that's all forgiveness needs to be, a release, not a reconciliation. It happened on a Tuesday, without drama, without build-up, just the soft clicking of plates in the kitchen, the steady hum of guests chatting over fresh-baked scones, and the sun spilling across the hardwood floor in golden lines like it always did. I was arranging a new bouquet of dahlias in the lobby, not because anyone asked, but because it was Tuesday, and that's what I always did after the breakfast rush. There was nothing particularly special about that morning, and maybe that's what made it feel like a turning point. Healing didn't arrive like a letter in the mail. It just existed in the background until you realized you hadn't looked over your shoulder in days. The moment hit me while I was tying the twine around the vase. I paused and blinked, unsure of what felt so different. And then I understood. I didn't feel the hollow space anymore. The ache that used to sit just behind my ribs, tight and lingering, was gone. I wasn't waiting for a text or an apology or a version of my family that would finally recognize me for more than the daughter who managed on her own. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just there, whole, present, unbothered by the quiet from the people who once made too much noise by their absence. Later that day, a young couple checked in, newlyweds from Oregon. They were wide-eyed and sweet, laughing about how they'd accidentally taken the wrong highway and ended up an hour late. I walked them to room 6 and asked if they'd like anything special for their first evening. They looked at each other. Then the husband said, "Just a night where we don't have to do anything. This place already feels like a reset." That word, reset, landed gently, because that's what this had become. Not just an inn, not just my livelihood, but my own reset. My quiet rebellion against everything I wasn't given, everything that was withheld. This place didn't just heal others. It had rebuilt me, brick by emotional brick, until I no longer carried the echoes of who I used to be. I had curated a life I didn't need to escape from. Lily caught me smiling that evening as I cleaned up the porch. "What's the grin for?" she asked. "I think I just realized I'm not sad anymore." She raised an eyebrow. "About everything," I said. "Them, Chloe, college, the years I spent trying to be seen." She nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? How peace doesn't arrive like thunder, but like breath." That night, I walked the inn's halls slowly. I stopped in each room and remembered the early days, the leaks I patched myself, the reviews I worried over, the first time I heard a guest say, "This place feels like home." And I realized I had made something sacred out of abandonment. I had turned loss into legacy. When I got back to my suite, I pulled out the old envelope I had tucked into the bottom drawer years ago. Inside were the brochures from my rejected college applications, the congratulations cards Chloe had gotten that I found in a forgotten drawer, and the photo of the graduation ceremony I attended alone. I sat with them one last time. Not with anger, not with longing, but with quiet respect for the girl who kept showing up even when no one else did. Then I stood, walked outside, and lit a small fire in the metal pit near the bluff. One by one, I let the pages go. They curled, blackened, and lifted into the sky like wishes that no longer needed granting. I wasn't burning evidence of pain. I was releasing its hold. By the time I returned inside, my cheeks were damp, not from sadness, but from the wind and maybe a little from relief. That night, as I drifted into sleep, I realized something else. Healing doesn't make you forget. It just makes remembering kinder. And I had finally learned how to remember without reopening the wound. People often ask me if I regret leaving, if I ever think about what would have happened had I stayed, kept trying, kept pleasing, kept shrinking to fit into a family that never made space for who I really was. And the truth is, I don't wonder anymore, because the life I built in the aftermath is the most honest version of me I've ever known. Walking away wasn't loud. It wasn't a slammed door or a final shout. It was quiet. It was a decision made in the middle of 1,000 small hurts. I walked away the day I stood alone at my own graduation, the day I realized my name meant less than hers, the day I understood that loyalty to people who don't see you is a slow kind of erasure. But what they never expected, what even I didn't see coming, was that walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The moment I stopped trying to earn their love was the moment I started learning how to love myself. And with that love came a clarity that changed everything. I built this inn from foundation to roof. I chose every wall color, every lamp, every quilt and hand-labeled tea jar. Each room carries my handwriting, my effort, my soul. I didn't inherit this life. I created it, not from wealth, but from will, not from privilege, but from the pieces they dropped when they turned away. And what bloomed from that brokenness was something even they couldn't take credit for. A few weeks ago, Chloe visited. It was unexpected. She pulled up in a rental, hair shorter than I remembered, carrying a tote bag and a bouquet of lavender I knew she didn't pick out herself. "I wasn't sure you'd let me in," she said. "I always let people in," I replied. That was never my problem. We sat on the porch like strangers wearing familiar faces. She told me about her new job, her kids, her divorce. She looked tired in a way I recognized. Then she asked it, "Do you hate me?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because it mattered that I said it right. "No," I said, "but I stopped needing you to love me the way I wanted. That's different." She nodded, and I think something in her understood. Before she left, she stood by the archway and turned back. "You're happy here." I smiled. "I'm at peace here." That night, I sat in the same spot where I first imagined this place. The sea air still smelled like salt and courage, and I realized I didn't need revenge. I didn't need regret. What I had was better, freedom, earned through fire. So I don't regret walking away. Because I didn't walk away from love. I walked toward it. Toward the version of love that starts with yourself, that demands to be seen, even when no one's clapping. That doesn't wait for permission to begin. And in the end, that's the greatest kind of story there is. Not one of betrayal or bitterness, but of reclamation, of rebuilding, of refusing to stay small just because someone else couldn't see your worth. This is my story, and I wouldn't change a single chapter. In stories like these, we often search for poetic justice, the moment the people who hurt us come back, apologize, and redeem themselves. But true strength lies in walking forward whether they ever do or not. Emma's journey shows us that the most powerful revenge is joy, peace, and self-defined success. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And that, to me, is the kind of ending that truly heals. If this story touched you, subscribe to Revenge by Seren, because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming, just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed, rising, brilliant and unshaken. See you in the next story.